On December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service struck Pearl Harbor on the island of Oahu, in the then U.S. territory of Hawaii, where over 3,000 Americans were and wounded, and the United States was obliged to enter the theater of World War II, declaring war against Japan, Germany, and Italy in the same week. But was this attack on the US an accident? A failure of American intelligence? A brilliant military coup? At first, a panel created by FDR concluded that we had no advanced warning and should blame only local commanders for the lack of preparedness. However, according to author Robert S. Stinnett in his book Day of Deceit, The Truth About FDR and Pearl Harbor, the attack was the result of a carefully orchestrated design, initiated at the highest levels of the US government, to motivate Americans to support another massive foreign war. He uses over 200,000 documents and interviews obtained through the Freedom of Information Act to lay out how under Franklin Delano Roosevelt's leadership, the heads of the United States military would first provoke, then stand down and allow an attack to take place, absorbing the first strike from Japan, an overt act of war. This justified the United States' entrance into World War II against the Axis powers to serve British interests in Europe and around the world. On October 7, 1940, Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCullum sent a memo to two of Roosevelt's most trusted military advisors, which laid out 8 steps that he predicted would precipitate a Japanese attack on the United States. These 8 steps included using British and Dutch bases in the Pacific, aiding the Chinese government's fight with Japan, sending a division of long-range heavy cruisers and submarines into or adjacent to territorial waters of Japan, keeping the main strength of the U.S. fleet in the Hawaiian Islands, and completely embargoing all trade with Japan, just as the British Empire had already done. The day after this memo was sent to FDR's advisors, the State Department told Americans to evacuate Far East countries as quickly as possible in preparation for conflict, and Roosevelt ordered the U.S. fleet to stay in Hawaiian waters, which had already been there for an annual training exercise. Admiral James O. Richardson objected to keeping the fleet in Hawaii, citing a lack of training facilities, ammunition, fuel, and support craft. Quote, "There was no logical reason for me to make such a request," but he reluctantly obeyed the orders from Roosevelt and his military chiefs. FDR personally took charge of sending heavy cruisers near Japan's territorial waters, saying, quote, "I just want them to keep popping up here and there and keep the Japs guessing. I don't mind losing 1 or 2 cruisers, but do not take a chance on losing 5 or 6. The Pacific Fleet commander objected to this strategy, retorting, quote, "It is ill-advised and will result in war if we make this move." However, this is exactly what FDR wanted to do. Admiral Richardson quotes Roosevelt as saying, quote, "Sooner or later the Japanese would commit an overt act against the United States, and the nation would be willing to enter the war." During his campaign for the new term of his presidency, FDR promised voters, quote, "Your boys are not going to be sent into any foreign wars." But according to his biographer, he told members of his staff, quote, "Of course we'll fight if we're attacked. If someone attacks us, then it isn't a foreign war, is it?" Soon, Lieutenant Commander McCullum's 8-point action memo would make the president's words into a reality. Additionally, despite an embargo on trade with Japan, the White House allowed Japan to obtain petroleum supplies sufficient to maintain its ability to make war. Between 1940 and 1941, a period when American oil supplies were supposedly under embargo, over 9 million barrels of gasoline were licensed for export to Japan, with 2 million more pending, while the Japanese tankers transporting the oil were under electronic surveillance by the Navy, including their radio codes. Conventional history states that these codes were not solved until the spring of 1942, but new information reveals that a team of Army and Navy cryptographers solved the 2 principal Japanese government radio code systems in the early fall of 1940, around the same time that McCollum's memo reached the Oval Office. They had solved all 4 of the principal radio codes for Japanese warships by the fall of 1941, the same 4 radio codes that Admiral Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy, used to transmit his war orders up until the attack. Between November 20th and December 6th, Yamamoto and his commanders clearly revealed 2 forces were aimed at Hawaii, so the US undoubtedly deciphered Japanese communications that indicated their plan to attack Pearl Harbor. However, the timing of this successful decoding was hidden in naval intelligence records, even long after the war. Some of these encrypted messages included communications from a Japanese spy, which the FBI deemed the outside man, named Tadashi Morimura, who was posing as the chancellor in the Japanese consulate in Hawaii. The FBI and White House knew Morimura and his Japanese spy team were operating in Hawaii from March of 1941 until the attack, even intercepting and decoding his bomb plot grid details on August 21st, which gave the lay of the land for Pearl Harbor and advised for the attack. After providing a clear map of the target and intel on U.S. naval activities for almost the entire year of 1941, the day before the attack, Morimura sent a message to Tokyo stating, quote, "Even though they have actually made preparations, there are limits to the balloon defense of Pearl Harbor. I imagine that in all probability there is considerable opportunity left to take advantage for a surprise attack against these places." This message was decoded moments after being sent, but the warning was withheld. Almost everything about the official Pearl Harbor narrative is a lie, including the fact that the Japanese fleet did not maintain radio silence as it approached Hawaii, a fabrication used to convince the world that we didn't see it coming, even that day. The truth is, the US military had been monitoring the movements and communications of Japanese ships for almost a year as they returned to their homelands from abroad, clearly planning something big in the Pacific. Japan's initial planning for the attack began in the fall of 1940. Naval Minister Admiral Koshiro Uekawa and Admiral Yamamoto agreed that a surprise air raid on Pearl Harbor should start Japan's military offense against America. At the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, the attack plan was leaked from Japanese naval officers to U.S. Secretary Max Bishop through a Peruvian minister to Japan. On January 27, 1941, Bishop sent the U.S. Secretary of State a message reading, quote, "My Peruvian colleague told a member of my staff that he had heard from many sources, including a Japanese source, that the Japanese military forces planned in the event of trouble with the United States to attempt a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, using all of their military facilities." When Lieutenant Commander Arthur McCollum heard about this message, he advised FDR to dismiss the warning, which he did. In the end, on December 7th, the attack on Pearl Harbor took place. Millions of Americans who wanted nothing to do with foreign wars, in shock, ran to their recruiting offices to join the various armed services. In that week, FDR got exactly what he wanted from provoking Japan: America at war to protect British interests around the world. As Roosevelt said in his speech the following day, it truly was a day of infamy, but it was also a day of deceit.